So I guess we'll start just by talking about you and your experience in the publishing industry, a bit of background as to what you've been doing in the industry, and then we'll get started on talking about the book. So
yeah, mad.
How did you get started in becoming a writer?
Yeah, I have maybe like a bit of a strange journey to being a writer. So I did a writing degree alongside my law degree, kind of trying to break it up. But I hadn't really seriously considered the idea of being a writer, I guess, in a really serious way. I was kind of content just scribbling down and having an audience of my peers or whatever. But one day I found myself kind of struggling to find a home and without a lot of money behind myself. And so I kind of threw together these random scribblings into a book and submitted it to the Black and White Literary Fellowship that runs through the State Library of Queensland. And I didn't win that year, but the following year, with a little bit of encouragement, I gave it a shot again with the same book, but with feedback from the judges, and it got through. So that's kind of my haphazard little entry into the publishing world. So since then, I've published 2 books of my own, and the reason I'm talking to you today is because I was approached for a 3rd book, which I edited rather than wrote myself, through UQ Press, called Firefront.
Cool. So UQ Press approached you about putting together this anthology. How did you go about finding contributors for the anthology?
Yeah, so I have a couple of thanks that I have to give. So the purpose of the anthology is not to catalogue every Indigenous, First Nations, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander poet who's working in this space right now. It's to try and represent just some of the poets who are really on the forefront, pushing barriers and how we think about ourselves, how others perceive us. And so first that involved surveying and getting across the entire field of astonishing and exciting First Nations poetry. That obviously has quite a significant history going back to Udjura Nunakal, the first published Aboriginal poet. And for that, I have to thank the team at Ostlit and Blackwords, especially Anita Heiss, who went through and meticulously catalogued all of this stuff, be it from small publishers or relatively large publishers. So I was, quite grateful for that work that they do, and I know it's not an easy thing to do. And then subsequent to that, especially for a lot of these smaller books, it just involved tracking them down. And so I spoke to Evelyn Araluen at the Wheeler Centre about this process, and it involved kind of nudging a lot of small libraries from all around, trying to get them to lend me copies that I promised I'd take care of because they're the last one in the state. And then I just sat down with them one night, and it really struck me just how long and precedented and hard fought for First Nations poetry has been, and that it was really necessary to honour and platform and pay respect to the work that had come before that enable us to have this moment that we're kind of having right now. So yeah, it was a really profound experience, kind of trying to pull everybody together. And it's not a responsibility I take lightly. And I'm sure that this book has made critical omissions that can be corrected by other anthologies, and it is incomplete. But it does its best to contribute to the memory of what's happening and what has happened in First Nations poetry without defining it.
Yeah. So did you have a clear idea of what the final product was going to be? It's divided up into 5 different themes throughout the book. Did that kind of happen naturally, or did you have an idea of what you wanted to happen as the final product?
Yeah, I really like dividing things into 5 for some reason. It also seemed like that there were poems that were having conversations with one another, so they weren't really linked just by theme. They were also kind of linked in the way that they would reference one another or reference similar events. And I wanted them to be grouped in a way that reflected that. So hence the 5 sections. Sorry, I'll say that again so you can get out the message tone, and I'll put it on silent. That's my bad. But hence the 5 sections that came about was because I wanted these poems to be grouped in a way that showed that they had a thematic consistency, or they had a stylistic consistency, or they represented a particular moment that happened. So that's kind of how the 5 eventuated. Each section has roughly 10 poems in them. But I also wanted, as you'll see, the collection is not just poetry, it's also essays. And these were original essays commissioned by me and UQP. With these 10 or so poems in mind, they were sent away to these essayists, and we just asked them how they wanted to react or respond or contextualize or talk about these poems. And so that was something I was really committed to from the beginning, I think, because the idea that as an editor I would have the single interpretive voice over this collection sat really uncomfortably, and that interpretation of Indigenous poetry especially is a collective thing. The legacy that poetry leaves is effectively the legacy that's carried with it by our readers. And I also wanted to demonstrate that it's not just Indigenous poets who are interested in poetry. It's Indigenous writers from across the spectrum, Indigenous intellectuals, but also people in the everyday who are driven and motivated and inspired by the vision that poetry puts out of ourselves. And it has a much, much broader impact than simply the poetry as it appears on the page. It has a really deep political and social impact for our mob.
Yeah. So what do you think, what do you want other readers, such as, white people such as myself, what do you think you would like us to get out of reading something like this? I've never read a poetry collection by Indigenous authors before. I've never even come across one, aside from Cobby Eckermann's Ruby Moonlight, which I haven't read yet. But it was a very interesting read, and I really enjoyed it. But I'm not entirely sure what white readers, what you want them to get out of it, because it's has such cultural importance to Indigenous authors.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, it has cultural importance, there's no denying that. It has social importance, but Indigenous poets also have a poetic craft that other mob who are not Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander can learn from or converse with. So I guess at a base level want white readers to engage with this as poetry, and not fall into the trap that sometimes happens with Indigenous poetry, where it gets kind of mysticized or deified in a way that, in elevating it so much, it becomes really dehumanizing to have readers engage with it that way. Yeah. In terms of how I want white readers, I guess, to engage with this book, just as kind of a door into poetry that people who aren't First Nations don't often encounter. It's meant to be the beginning or an introduction to something for people who aren't familiar with it, and for people who are familiar with these poets and their poems, especially mob. I think it is meant to be a testament or a memory to what's gone before and what we currently have right now.
Yeah, I think it was a really great introduction into Indigenous language. I think a lot of authors in the collection use their language really well, and I really enjoyed it. And I'd love to hear some of them read out loud. I think that would be, I think a lot of it reads like slam poetry, or there was one that I think that was like a rap, which I really enjoyed. So I think, I'd love to hear them read out loud, which I think it would make it even more impactful, I think. Yeah.
I totally agree. And a lot of these are performance poems as well. So when we said that this was a a collection of published First Nations poetry. It's published in lots of different ways. So as you said, there's kind of rap, there's lyrics, there's really poetry that was written quite explicitly before performance. And that has a place, I think, in terms of thinking about how print poetry is kind of diverting out, and these kind of intertextual relationships between poetic forms are developing, and how they're kind of developing in the same way their own languages and conventions and their own kind of social impact for our community. So yeah, it's really exciting for me to be able to include those texts and to honour them as the poetry that they are.
Yeah. So all of the things that are in this book, have they been previously published, or are there some new authors as well that have been included?
So this is just all poetry that's previously been published. I was originally contacted for a collection that was just of already published works, so an anthology of, I guess, like greatest hits, if you will. And then, it developed into Firefront. So there's no original content in here except for the essays. The poems themselves are sourced from other anthologies that actually have been developed. So Us Mob Writing comes to mind, which is an anthology done by the late Auntie Carrie Reid Gilbert, who was a real champion of First Nations writers. And there's a really, really long precedent of this kind of practice, anthologies of First Nations works, working together to create meaning that's more than the sum of their parts. So to be part of that long legacy of anthologies is really, really exciting. And also to be able to, with each poem, open a new door for a new poet or for a new style of poetry for readers to explore is kind of the whole guiding purpose of the work.
Great. So was there anything else you wanted to add about the book? Maybe how the title came about, or what the process was like from finding all of these poems and stories and then putting them together into an anthology to working with UQ Press, kind of put it out as a manuscript. What was that process like?
Yeah, it ended up being pretty rushed because of COVID. So we're 2 months out now from the release of the book, but this is around about the release date that we had slated. So yes, towards the end, it was a bit of a womba rush. But overall, I think there's going to be tensions between non-Indigenous publishers and Indigenous writers, and those kind of generally played out as they usually do. But I think the process has developed, and I'm hopeful that this practice of anthologizing for a broader audience is going to become more and more common, and also less and less taxing on our communities, given that these works have already been written.
Yeah.
The title came about somewhat randomly. It came out before the recent horrifying summer of bushfires that we've had. And the idea of the Firefront was that there's kind of this thin strip of fire that has the wind behind it, that given the right circumstances, if the wind changes to west and east, for example, can become this huge wall of flame and have a massive source of power behind it. And I wanted to have a collection of poetry that reflected the dynamism and the context specificness of First Nations poetry, and how it moved like all poetry with its circumstances, but how it uniquely derived power from that. And so that, Firefront was kind of this messy, haphazard, work in progress title that I had for it that just ended up being carried through to the end. One of those serendipitous things. But of course, in between conceiving the title of Firefront and publishing Firefront, there was this horrendous season of bushfires, to which we made an acknowledgement in the book, not only demonstrating, I guess, how much there is to lose for First Nations poets, but how much effort they have to put into protecting what's there.
that's basically all the questions I had.
Oh, deadly.
So you had something published in the anthology as well.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, did you want to talk a little bit about that and how that poem came about?
Yeah, so the poem's called Many Girls, White Linen. It co-won the Judith Wright Poetry Prize for Emerging Writers, and that's run through Overland Journal. It's a really, really simple poem. It was written using this technique called like constraint or restriction, which is where you give yourself like a really strict set of rules to write poetry by. And I really like it because in eliminating choices, you can kind of just do your best with the one path you've set yourself. And it meant that the poem came together really quickly. So the rule was 4 words per line, and they all had to have some kind of rhyming schema that was like nail, many, try. Yeah, there was a whole heap of like really weird torsical rhymes in there, and they all had to link. And where possible, I had to have monosyllabic, 1-syllable words. Yeah, so it came together in a lunch break after I'd been struggling with it for a really long time. So it was inspired by some of my own family's experience on my nan's side of Cootamundra Girls' Home, but also from this growing body of First Nations-led scholarship about these institutions. And one piece of scholarship I was reading at the time kind of talked about white linen as a symbol for what was forced on Aboriginal women and girls in particular. And I got really struck with that, I think, because at the time, this is like 2016, white linen was everywhere. Everyone was wearing it. And at the same time, unearthing photographs of people I loved also in pressed white linen. And so, yeah, this poem kind of emerged out of that image, out of Picnic at Hanging Rock style, white femininity, white man's burden stuff, and came together in a really surprising way. Sometimes the poem just happens and you just have to make the right conditions for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's it. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Maybe the release date for the book, or if there's any promotional things you're doing that we can advertise?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'd encourage people to pick up the book if you can. If you can't purchase the book, which is completely understandable, definitely encourage you to go and get it at, if you're at school or at university, at your school or university library. And if you're not in those institutions, then you can get it hopefully at your local library, and payments still go to the author and the publisher. You can pick up a copy of this at all good bookstores or direct on the University of Queensland Press website. And as much as I find it hard to brag about books that I've published, I didn't publish this one, so I can brag as much as I want. It's a really, 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 really good book that I had almost nothing to do with, except I sent emails to people. And I am so honoured whenever I pick it up to read it, to be reminded of the legacy that's behind us and the one that we have to carry on.